Hi everybody. Okay, so I wanted to take some time and talk to you about Bloom's taxonomy. Whoops. Yeah. Hi everybody. So we're going to take some time and give you some background on Bloom's taxonomy. You'll hear a lot about that in terms of hanging around, writing lesson plans, developing learning objectives, and so on. But anytime you're around teachers a lot, you'll hear somebody start talking about moving your students to higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So we wanted to give you a little bit of information about that, an introduction to it, and getting you started thinking about why this might be something you want to consider in designing instruction. So the first question is, well, what's a taxonomy? That's a picture of Benjamin Bloom, who died a few years ago. He was an educational researcher and writer. But what's a taxonomy? Well, if you've taken a science class, like maybe biology or botany, you've probably heard about a taxonomy as being kind of how we organize living things, kingdom, phylum, what comes after that? Kingdom, phylum, uh, class, order, family, genus, and species. That's a taxonomy. It's a way of organizing stuff into different categories. That's pretty much all it means. Now, the other question is, why would we want to think about a taxonomy when we're designing learning objectives? So that's a little bit different kind of question that you want to consider. So if you think about this, well, we have different purposes, different ways we want to do things, different things we want to achieve on maybe an introductory lesson. A purpose for that might be to give our students some kind of awareness level of maybe some definitions or something like that. And then later on, we're going to get to the point where we're actually going to use that knowledge to construct something or to do something with it. So we have different purposes, and so maybe we want to sort out our perspectives on this as we construct our lessons. So this is Bloom's taxonomy, those 6 things in that triangle that you see over there. And that's typically how it's presented as a hierarchical structure. It grows. It goes from bottom to top. It goes from simple to complex. So according to the original work on Bloom, he said that it starts out with the knowledge level, which is supposedly the lower level of learning, and then moves on up through understanding, application, analysis, synthesis, and finally the top level that you want to get to in Bloom is called evaluation. And so, you can think about that. This hierarchical idea also means that each level contains the ones that are underneath it. So that's the integrative part of it. So you have to have knowledge before you can move to understanding. And so understanding contains all of the knowledge that you had, and application contains all of the understanding, and so on. And according to this particular model, the final place you want to get to, the most complex thing you can do, is the evaluation level. I'll mention that Bloom's taxonomy, this original one that we're looking at, was constructed in 1956. And you may ask, have we learned anything about how people learn, anything about how they think? Has our perspectives on teaching and learning changed in any way since then? And hopefully you would answer yes. There's a lot of other things that we know. So I would suggest to you that the original Bloom's taxonomy is a bit of a dinosaur in today's teaching world. It really does kind of oversimplify the way you think in terms of, okay, all I got to do is know the facts and then move up from there. The superordinate levels, in other words, the higher up ones, may involve more difficult processes than the subordinate ones. So you might think about synthesis may be much more complex than application. It's not just added on. there may be different kinds of things going on cognitively in terms of your thinking from one level to another. So it's not just an additive kind of thing where you just get all the knowledge and then you move on to something else. The other thing is this idea of evaluation as the top, the ultimate, is perhaps not necessarily appropriate. I may need to make some deliberate decisions about something before I go about deciding what I want to know or what I want to understand. So it's not necessarily a one-way linear approach to learning like Bloom suggests. Another way to think about it is to consider, what do I do with how I think? You know, what kinds of knowledge do I have? Instead of just saying there's knowledge and that's all there is to it, maybe there's different kinds of knowledge. And so you might think about this way in terms of, well, what kinds of knowledge might I have? I can know some facts, which are things like the names of places, names, times, places, dates, what you might call pieces of data. A measurement is a fact, but these are simple ideas, simple elements. Now, the idea of a concept, conceptual knowledge, is much more complex than that. It talks about conceptual knowledge is the relationships between these ideas. So, for example, George Washington was the first president of the United States is a fact. If we wanted to take a look at a more complex concept, we would say George Washington's identity as commanding general in the American Revolution was a highly influential part of his becoming the first president, and his experiences then strongly influenced how he perceived the role of the president. That's not a fact. That's a concept. Very complex, very nuanced. So another kind of information, another kind of knowledge we can have is procedural. How to do something. How to drive a car is procedural knowledge. The name of your car, the brand of your car, and the year of it, that's a fact. The conceptual part would be, you know, kind of the ideas that went behind the design of your car and its own evolution over time. So procedures, like it says, a set of steps, a set of techniques, a set of methods. And you can be thinking in your own content area about how these different kinds of knowledge function, the different roles of them within that. It's probably easy to think about it in terms of math. You can think about the basic elements would be your math basic facts. Pardon me. Numbers, things like that. Concepts, of course, are more principles that you might follow, like the idea of similar triangles as a conceptual understanding. And then procedures is a set of steps, an algorithm, a method, a formula to follow. Now this fourth domain of knowledge that it mentions here, which it calls the metacognitive knowledge, is really something that should be built into everything we do. This idea that we want our learners to be developing an understanding of how they think. And that's really what this idea of metacognition means. If you think about breaking the word down, cognition or cognitive means thinking, and the meta part, it means about. So it's thinking about your own thinking, metacognition. So in about 2001 or so, much more recent, two of Bloom's collaborators named Anderson and Krathwohl did a revision to the taxonomy of learning and gave it a little different look. If we go back to the original Bloom, it was knowledge, understanding, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Now we're talking remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So there's a difference in, first of all, the grammar that they're using. Bloom uses nouns. The revision uses verbs. So considering it as a much more active process, what are we going to do with this different kind of knowledge? We're not just going to know it, but instead it says, well, there's different kinds of things that we can know, and there's different things we can do with what we know. And the other thing you might notice is that that evaluation is no longer the top category. Instead, it's called evaluating, and creating is now but it's not really considered as the top. It's just considered as another kind of thinking. So here's the definitions of these different categories in the taxonomy. You really don't want to think about it as a pyramid or a ladder or something like that. You just want to think of them as different categories, different kinds of things that you do with the different kinds of knowledge that you have. So really think about it not as a pyramid or a ladder, but as a table in which the kinds of things we want our students to do could fit anywhere on this table. It could be I'm wanting them to use factual knowledge in the process of evaluation, or I'm asking them to use procedural knowledge in the process of creating, or I'm wanting them to analyze something using conceptual knowledge. So the different kinds of knowledge that we might have and the different purposes to which we might put that different kinds of knowledge. That's really a little more complex way to think about thinking. Now, one more cognitive taxonomy you can think of. Remember, that's a way of classifying the different kinds of thinking that we want our learners to be involved in, is this thing called Webb's depth of knowledge. And if you click on this, it'll take you to a website about Webb's depth of knowledge, and it's typically presented as a wheel with different, 4 different, they call them levels here, starting with level 1. Looks a little bit similar to Bloom in that it's got kind of a remembering kind of thing here, kind of an application thing here, maybe kind of an analysis thing here, and so on. And then around the outside, it's got some example verbs that describe the kinds of things that you would be doing. So it's providing you with a vocabulary of thinking, a framework about the different kinds of thinking you want your students to do, but really a way for you to think about your students and how they're going to engage with the content. These words here, rigor and cognitive demand or cognitive load, cognitive complexity, you'll hear about a lot, in that we don't want all of our learning activities to be memorize the capitals of the 50 states. And now, what are you going to do with that? Well, I'm going to repeat the names of the 50 states back. Okay. That's oftentimes an assignment you might hear in an elementary school social studies class. Our assignment for this week is we're going to learn about the 50 states, and how we're going to do that is we're going to memorize all the state capitals. Well, you may have lots of questions about how appropriate, how important, how relevant that kind of assignment is. And so this idea of a taxonomy really requires us to look at those choices and say, you know, what's the importance of this? What kind of cognitive complexity am I involving if I'm asking students to simply remember the names of the 50 state capitals? Is there any conceptual knowledge involved in that? No. It's pretty much just factual knowledge. And how are we going to measure that? Well, we're just going to ask them to repeat it. Big deal. Instead, if we ask them, okay, why is Sacramento the capital of California? That's not a question you can answer with a simple factual response. So it's a much higher level of complexity and cognitive demand. And so here's Webb's depth of knowledge wheel. Now, the reason we're spending some time going through this is that these are the words that you're going to want to use when you start constructing learning objectives, which is what we'll talk about next time. Okay, thanks.